The Thirlwell Inquiry has just released a new document related to the grievance procedure that Lucy Letby undertook at the County Chester Hospital in 2016. This new document is essentially a summary of the grievance that was authored by Dr. Chris Green. Before we go into this document, it's important to note that the two foremost consultants regarding which the grievance was taken out, Dr. Stephen Brewery and Dr. Ravi Jairam, who were undeniably the two that were most strongly pushing for Lucy to be removed from the unit, had never provided any evidence of wrongdoing when this grievance procedure began. So this is from November of 2016, and you've got SB Stephen Brewery here and RJ Ravi Jairam commenting. When asked about his concerns regarding Lucy Letby, Stephen Brewery stated only the association with her being on shift and the death of the babies. So that's literally no evidence at all. Ravi Jairam stated that all that was said was that we had concerns, we noted the association with Lucy being present, and the rather disingenuous comment here, decisions were made were entirely those made by senior management. No clinicians were involved in the decision to remove Lucy from the unit. It was a board decision. Perhaps what Mr. Jairam isn't aware is that if you write things down, they can be recovered at a later date. So that's a lesson for him to learn in future. Now, I'm giving one of multiple examples. This is just a succinct way of illustrating this. There are many, many other examples. But both Brewery and Jairam have had the Care Quality Commission visiting the hospital, the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health visiting the hospital, the entire grievance procedure, multiple meetings with executives, and they would have several more months after this grievance procedure was concluded. During all of these opportunities, they never raised any evidence at all. They didn't raise any evidence during the grievance, they didn't raise any evidence before in the grievance, they didn't raise any evidence after the grievance. We know this because this is a document from Cheshire Police dated the 5th of May 2017, some 6 months after the grievance was completed. And as you can say here, Cheshire Police conclude there is no evidence other than coincidence. And they had no intention of investigating, as we know, as we've been over on this channel many times previously, until Dr. Stephen Brewery and Dr. Ravi Jairam turned up in their police station on the 15th of May, some 10 days after this, 3 days after Cheshire Police had met with executives and they had indicated that they had no intention of investigating. 3 days later, Brewery and Jairam suddenly started mentioning some so-called evidence, and Dr. Jairam remembered that he'd supposedly seen Lucy attempt to murder child K by extubating a tube deliberately, although we know the credibility of this particular claim. So it's important to give that context before we start. Let me be crystal clear, no one ever presented any evidence of wrongdoing at this hospital. So there have been suggestions elsewhere that this should somehow have been an investigation into Lucy Letby, but there is no conceivable way that the executives could rubber stamp or initiate anything of that nature, because they continually asked for evidence and none was provided. Even up to the point when it was referred to the police, still none was provided. So you can't have an executive team investigating supposed malfeasance by a nurse on the basis of absolutely no evidence whatsoever. I mean, that would be, I think the most generous way that you can possibly describe it is that it would be deeply unprofessional. It probably breaks all kinds of regulations and rules. It may even be criminal. I doubt that it would quite meet the bar of being criminal, but certainly it would be an enormous faux pas, to put it mildly, by the hospital, and that would just make the grievance more stronger, even stronger, when it came. It is fortunate for the hospital that they didn't investigate Lucy Letby because no one had any evidence. No one provided any evidence. No one attempted to provide any evidence. So this could only ever be an investigation into Lucy's quite legitimate grievance. So this is the front page of the grievance raised and this document that's authored by Dr. Christopher Green. As you can see, it's a report to Annette Weatherly with HR support provided by Lucy Samenta. It's an investigation into the grievance raised by Lucy Letby regarding her redeployment from the neonatal unit. And it was published on or sent out on 12th of November 2016. This is, ironically, exactly 6 months ahead of the time when executives from the hospital would meet with Cheshire Police and everyone would agree there's no evidence, there's no basis for the investigation. So I'll just go over this. This is, again, right at the beginning. There's some other contextual information I won't go over because anyone watching the channel will be aware of it. So it would just be outlining things that have already been established. But this is the outline of Lucy's grievance that was submitted 2 months earlier, just over 2 months earlier, which raised the following queries. The proposed plan of supervision of practice and repetition of competencies was not followed for any other member of staff, nursing or medical, and I wish to know why and if this was ever the true intention of the Trust. So we're going to see some discussion of all of these points, but before we go any further, I'm just going to give my opinion. I don't think for 1 second that the Trust ever had any intention of investigating practice, repetition, all these things she's describing of competencies. I think that was simply a story that was told to Lucy so that she didn't kick off more than she did. And I do have some sympathy with the executive team, as I've said previously. It's very difficult to say to someone, the consultants or people working on the unit have suspicions that you've been deliberately harming babies. Especially as Lucy would say, well, what evidence do they have for that? And then the executives would have to say, well, absolutely none whatsoever. This could only possibly tear the department apart. So they were really trying to avoid that, and they were trying to tread on eggshells. As I've said previously, possibly what was needed was a more hardball approach. However, that's all in the past now. Was I being investigated on a personal level, and what is it that the external review may indicate in relation to me returning to the neonatal unit? The reasons for me being instructed not to have any contact with my neonatal unit colleagues for an extended period of time. Why the external review panel did not know about my circumstances, and why so much emphasis has been put on waiting for the review when it is not looking at anything pertinent to my situation. I would like the Trust to outline to me how its values, such as being open and honest and we respect each other, have been adhered to in my situation. It must be said with regard to this particular query that it was an absolute formality that Lucy would win this point. I mean, there's just no prospect that the Trust could defend itself on this point. I would like to know exactly what I've been accused of, what allegations have been made, and by who, and how the Trust has dealt with this. Again, it was an absolute formality that Lucy would win this point. I also wish to be informed of any evidence the Trust may have and the process which they have followed. Well, obviously we know they didn't have any evidence at all. I would appreciate assurances from the executive team that this has been dealt with appropriately and that my confidentiality is being maintained. How will the Trust support me to return to the neonatal unit on a personal and professional level? So, again, I've discussed this in recent videos, but there was a clear determination on the part of Lucy to return to the neonatal unit, and I think this is emblematic of the fact that she felt her competence was being called into question and she didn't feel that was fair. As I've suggested previously, I don't believe you can go back into a workplace where people have accused you of murdering anyone, obviously. I think that's just untenable. But the more that I've read about this, the more I've understood and can very much appreciate why Lucy did want to go back onto the unit, even though I think that was, at the very least, unwise. I think it was untenable, frankly. But she was faced with a very difficult decision. And also, she was undoubtedly, I have no doubt, proud of the fact that she'd qualified to be a neonatal nurse, which is very difficult. Most people don't make it. Most nurses that wish to be neonatal nurses, most people that attempt to qualify to be a neonatal nurse are not selected. So it's a big achievement, and she absolutely poured her heart and soul into it. There were reasons she was attached to Chester. She explained those in this statement that I've read out previously, and it's not difficult to understand why she wanted to go back on the unit. I still maintain it was a mistake, but it's a mistake that I now understand. Finally, before we begin analysing the grievance document, I just want to go over this bit as well. Lucy Letby stated in her grievance that the outcome she's seeking is to return to her full role within the neonatal unit with a full apology for her treatment and a full explanation of the events that have occurred. Now, you've heard Martin Pittman speak on this channel about how extraordinary it is that she achieved exactly that, apart from the return. She was very close to returning, and had she returned, who knows what would have happened from there. Maybe everything would have been okay, and perhaps I wouldn't be sitting here and none of this would have happened. But the fact is she did definitely achieve a full apology, and she did gain a full explanation of the events. Now, Martin knows far better than me, although I'm gaining every day I'm gaining a greater appreciation of this. But he certainly knows better than me and he has said that this is extraordinary. I mean, this just can't happen. It doesn't happen. So actually, ironically, this grievance and the outcome of the grievance is kind of an enormous achievement for Lucy against the incredibly powerful consultant body. And then the second paragraph says, given the nature of the grievance and the potential involvement of the Trust executive team, it was decided that grievance should be formally investigated by a senior member of the Trust management team, Dr. Christopher Green, Director of Pharmacy, and heard by an external reviewer, Annette Weatherly, the Deputy Chief Nurse at the University Hospital of South Manchester. So you now know why Dr. Christopher Green and Annette Weatherly are named in this document. It is known that Alison Kelly, Executive Director of Nursing and Quality, has previously worked at UHSM, University Hospital of South Manchester. However, Ms. Weatherly is not a former colleague or associate of Alison Kelly, so this is just establishing there's no vested interest or conflict of interest or anything like that. So we've seen what Lucy was claiming, we've seen what she wants to occur, we've seen the kind of process and procedure involved. I have done a few videos already on the grievance and can do, and probably will do, several more in the future because there are so many documents to go over, all of which are highly illustrative. In this video, we're just going to look again at this document authored by Dr. Christopher Green, in which he goes over many important points that he has garnered from the process of interviewing people at the Council of Chester and investigating this grievance, this extraordinary process that's been brought by this kind of rookie neonatal nurse against the entire consultant body. So the document begins with the process of investigation, noting things that we already know. I should also mention here that Lucy Samenta, HR specialist, was included in the investigation, was part of the process, which is why she's copied into it at the start as well. And we see a list of people who were interviewed for this investigation. So Lucy Letby, staff nurse, neonatal unit, and she was represented by Tony Millea, her representative at the Royal College of Nursing. Now, I learned something quite interesting about Tony Millea recently and the Cheshire Constabulary, which I will reveal at some point in the foreseeable future in a forthcoming video. But all of these names, I don't know if people will be familiar with all of them. Probably you are familiar with many of them. I'm going to go over them all, and if you're not familiar with them now, then by the time you've read my book, you'll be familiar with probably all of them. But Mr. Ian Harvey, Executive Medical Director, very important executive at the hospital. Alison Kelly, Executive Director for Nursing and Quality, another person with an important role at the hospital. Sue Hodkinson, Executive Director for Human Resources and Organisational Development, so another important executive, undoubtedly. Sian Williams, Deputy Director of Nursing and Quality, another person who has a lot of responsibility. Hayley Cooper, who was a Royal College of Nursing representative as well, although she wasn't, I think, Lucy's direct representative because that was Tony Millea, but she played a role in representing Lucy and sitting with her and being involved in several of the meetings, as we'll see in grievance documents that we'll go over in the future. Karen Rees was the divisional lead nurse for urgent care. We've seen her in documentaries, someone who had a lot of clinical importance at the Council of Chester. Ariane Powell, who was the ward manager for the neonatal unit, again, a lot of clinical importance in her role. Yvonne Griffiths, who was essentially her deputy. And then, of course, Dr. Ravi Jairam and Dr. Stephen Brewery. Note that the other consultants are not interviewed. So this is, again, emblematic of what we've already said. It's not open to debate. Dr. Stephen Brewery and Dr. Ravi Jairam are unquestionably those who have led this process. There's those who have pushed for Lucy Letby to be taken off the neonatal unit. As we've already established, when it came to evidence, they were drier than a bone. They came up absolutely clean with nothing until the case had finally been referred to the police, when they invited themselves down there and then kind of seeded the police with what I've always described as information of varying degrees of accuracy, much of it inaccurate. So the next kind of interesting and relevant section is findings. And it's stated here that this is a timeline of events corroborated by statements and evidence included in appendices. On reflection, I'll just zoom in a little bit more so the text is clear for people. So a thematic review is undertaken by, and there's a comment here, presumably from Dr. Green, I'm a bit confused now about who did what and when. Do we have a copy of Ariane's that she's talked about with the columns on? So this was this is the predecessor of the shift chart that he's talking about. So this was compiled in July 2015. In my book, I have more information about the compilation of this shift chart that is not in this document. In July 2016, there was unfortunately the death of 2 triplets on the unit, the third triplet being sent to Arrow Park Hospital for ongoing care. The first baby died on Thursday, the second on Friday. Following this, a decision was taken to downgrade the unit from a level 3 to a level 2 care unit. So I've seen this written a few times. I find this highly confusing because it's never been a level 3 unit and it was downgraded to a level 2 unit. This all seems extremely strange. The most likely explanation for this is that it's just simply a mistake by those that have compiled this report, and it should say level 2 to level 1 unit. I don't see any other really feasible explanation. What you could say is a remote possibility. I don't think this is the case at all, but if it was being treated as a level 3 unit, it would explain the acuity of the infants on the unit. But surely it can't possibly have been being treated as a level 3 unit, because it's been downgraded now to a level 1 unit. It's been that way for 10 years. So I feel this must just be a mistaken understanding or a typo. Again, I don't see how it can be a typo, because you'd have to make 2 consecutive typos. It just doesn't seem very likely. It seems like a misunderstanding from Dr. Green and Lucy Samenta, probably. But it is very strange that this made the final cut and no one said, well, actually, it's not a level 3 unit. But there you go. The unit would be closed to the sickest babies until a review had assessed potential concerns about care on the unit. After this second death, Yvonne Griffiths reported that Stephen Breary had called Ariane Powell to express concerns about Lucy Letby, and as a result, Lucy Letby was moved from nights onto day shifts. If I forget any of the acronyms at any point, I do apologise, but they do make it as difficult as possible to read these documents. On Wednesday the 13th of July, Lucy Letby received a text from Yvonne Griffiths informing her to go into the office for an update. Yvonne Griffiths reports that she did not divulge the true purpose of this to Lucy Letby because she did not want to alarm her unduly, and because she did not want Lucy Letby to worry about it prior to arrival at the unit. I entirely believe that. As I said previously, I do think Lucy being kept in the dark was largely done for good reasons, and was largely done not to worry her, not to concern her, not to hurt her feelings, perhaps. I also think there was an element of trying to hold things together on the unit. While that is understandable, that's harder to defend, because ultimately Lucy had a right to know, and she should have been told. And the hospital ultimately conceded that. So you can see what way that part of the grievance is headed. They really don't have a leg to stand on. On Thursday the 14th of July, Lucy Letby was asked to report to Sian Williams' office with Ariane Powell to discuss the increase in neonatal mortality and the perceived commonality of Lucy Letby being on duty and with the deaths. So, I mean, that must have been an interesting discussion where Lucy would have said, what's the evidence that I've done anything wrong? Why on earth are these allegations being made? We don't have any evidence. Lucy Letby was informed that she had been on duty for the majority of deaths, and this had raised a warning flag that the Trust wished to address. As a result of the increase in mortality, Sian Williams informed Lucy Letby that there was to be a review of nursing and medical competencies, and that her competencies would be reassessed and her practice would be supervised. Lucy Letby was informed by Sian Williams that her association with neonatal deaths featured more prominently than others, and therefore the process would begin with her. So, I mean, that is where they basically lied to her, because there was never really any intention of assessing anyone else. Everything else they've said is true, but they told her that, we're just going to, obviously, naturally, we're going to begin with you, then we'll look at the others. But the reality is, there was never any intention of looking at the others. They never did look at any of the others. So that was an untrue statement, I would say. Obviously, I'm less critical of the nursing team than the consultants, but that was, I think, an unfair impression that was given to Lucy. Sian Williams summarised the content of the meeting and intended course of action in a letter to Lucy Letby, dated the 14th of July 2016. Ariane Powell emailed all neonatal unit staff on the 15th of July to inform them that all members of the neonatal unit staff were to undergo periods of clinical supervision and that Lucy Letby would be the first to undergo this process. So given that this has been sent out by Ariane Powell, perhaps there was something of a genuine intention to do this, because to send out an official email with this argument when there's no intention of doing so is unlikely, perhaps. Although a lot of strange things happen at this hospital, so it's really hard to say. But it seems to me that there was never any real serious intention of assessing anyone else on the unit. On Monday the 18th of July, Lucy Letby met with Yvonne Griffiths and Yvonne Farmer to discuss supervision and training, following which Lucy Letby met with Linda Guatea, HR business partner, and Karen Rees, lead nurse, urgent care. Lucy Letby was then informed by Karen Rees that she was not in fact going to undertake competencies and supervision, but was to be redeployed to the PALS team for a period of 4 to 6 weeks while external reviews took place. The content of the meeting is summarised in a letter from Karen Rees to Lucy Letby, dated the 18th of July 2016. So, to reflect on this for a second, this is very humiliating for Lucy. This is not just a situation where she is a nurse. All nurses have very difficult work to do. She has the kind of the highest level of specialised training, and she's worked on a level 3 neonatal unit, which is why they entrust in her more than they should, given her level of experience. Now she's being told we just want you to do admin for some weeks while we decide whether or not you're competent. And you actually see this reflected in notes that Lucy wrote. So the notes that were recovered, I've mentioned the blue post-it now, I've highlighted this probably more than anyone else. In this note, Lucy writes about her competencies, and she wants to know if she's missing anything. That's the phrase used. Well, let me reflect. She's talking about an HR meeting, and this may help me to reflect on my competencies and learn anything that I'm missing. All she's thinking about is they're thinking I'm an incompetent nurse. I don't believe that I am. But obviously, this is anyone would have doubt if you're taken out of your job and told we don't think you're good enough to do it anymore. We need to debate. Obviously, in most workplaces, people don't die. But if there've been some dramatic events and then it's all pinned on you, essentially, this must have been very distressing for her. So this would have been a very difficult time for her as it was, but then also she's been misled regarding she's going to be supervised, which never happened. They never really properly assessed her competence or anything like that. I mean, she did go away and do them, but they obviously didn't seriously look at her competencies in any meaningful way, because that would have revealed she was a competent nurse. Then she would have gone back onto the unit. That was going to happen, but there was never a thorough effort to look at other people on the unit. She was the scapegoat. As I've said numerous times, I believe that began due to a genuine concern. But if there was a real concern that there was nursing competence was the cause here, then it would have been necessary to look at every other nurse. But as we know, not only was there no intention of doing that, as is indicated here, but it quite obviously didn't happen at all. On the 5th of August, Lucy Letby attended an unplanned meeting with Karen Rees and was supported by Hayley Cooper and was informed that the external review had been delayed. Further meetings with Karen Rees took place on the 12th of August and 2nd of September. Lucy Letby was on leave from the 15th of August to the 29th of August. On the 6th of September, Lucy Letby met with Karen Rees and Hayley Cooper and was informed that a letter from the Royal College of Nurses highlighted that Lucy Letby had been redeployed due to concerns raised by consultants. So she only really got the truth on the 6th of September, nearly 2 months after she'd been told, oh, don't worry, Lucy, we just think there's possibly some competency issues. Everyone else is going to go through the same process. Don't worry. So you can see some of these points, as I mentioned, are a complete formality that they're going to be accepted. On the 9th of August, Ariane Powell emailed all neonatal unit staff to inform them that there were currently opportunities for staff to be seconded across the trust. It is therefore come at an opportune time for us, and we were able to second Lucy. Lucy is seconded to the Risk and Patient Safety Office for a period of 3 months. Now again, I think this comes from a good place. This is trying to dampen down gossiping on the unit and trying to protect Lucy. So although this is completely untrue, I do think this is... I mean, I don't know to what extent it can be justified that we'll lie to all the staff so that the staff don't get upset and Lucy isn't humiliated. That comes from a good place. To what extent is justified or can be justified, I don't know. It's really difficult for me to know. It'd be an interesting question to ask Michelle, or it'd be interesting for other nurses. If any nurses have an opinion on that, it'd be really interesting to know. I think it's quite a sensitive and considerate thing to do, but whether it's appropriate, I have no idea. But I mean, it's essentially untrue, obviously. On the 7th of September, in accordance with the trust policy, Lucy Letby raised a grievance which is shown in Appendix 1. Hayley Cooper contacted Sue Hodkinson on the 20th of September via email to query progress, and the grievance was acknowledged by letter on the 23rd of September. Further meetings took place with Karen Rees and Hayley Cooper over the course of the next month, until the 5th of September, when Lucy Letby and Hayley Cooper met with Karen Rees, Alison Kelly and Sue Hodkinson. At this meeting, Lucy Letby was informed that the intention was to get her back onto the neonatal unit, but this was unlikely to occur until the results of the review were back. These meetings were then scheduled to occur on a fortnightly basis. So something else to consider here is that if they'd managed to get this review together more quickly, it's possible Lucy would have been allowed back onto the unit, because the consultants, particularly Brewery and Jairam, were only able to manufacture the situation where the executives contacted the police in May. It was the letter goes out on the 2nd of May 2017. So that's because... And Lucy Letby was days away from going back on the unit prior to that. So if it hadn't been delayed for months and months and months, and they'd managed to get their shit together, as they failed to do in so many different ways on so many different occasions, then Lucy probably would have gone back on the unit, possibly even in late 2016, but certainly well before May 2017. It should have been early in 2017, and then it may have been impossible to refer the case to the police, because Lucy might have got back on the unit, performed competently, obviously no further deaths, and everything would have been okay. On the other hand, the other possibility, she could have gone back on the unit, there were more deaths. We now know that this idea that there were no more deaths on the unit is untrue. That's been made clear by now leaked documents that have been reported on by the Daily Telegraph. So we know this idea, there were no deaths, that's not true. So Lucy could have got herself into an even worse position, potentially. But as it turned out, because, as I say, the unit can't actually get their shit together, she never had the opportunity to go back onto the unit, because they never got the review done in time, and eventually there was enough badgering in the executives, they finally said, okay, I'll write letter to the police, little knowing what would occur from there. So the document then goes over each of these points in some depth. Now, what I think I'm going to do is split this video into 2 parts and make a follow-up video in the foreseeable future, because I think to go over the whole thing fairly thoroughly, and to go over the conclusion, and to go over the recommendations, is going to take longer than a standalone video should be. So I'll go over a few of these points in this video, and then I'll go over the remainder and the conclusion in another video and summarise the whole thing. But this first point is the proposed plan of supervision of practice and repetition of competencies was not followed for any other member of staff, nursing or medical, and I wish to know why, and if this was ever the true intention of the Trust. So, with regard to this, Dr. Christopher Green writes, there is a consistent view from Ariane Powell, Yvonne Griffiths, Sue Hodkinson, Alison Kelly, Ian Harvey, Karen Rees, and Sean Williams. There you go, I got through all the acronyms. That the initial intent was to ensure that all staff competencies for all nurses on the neonatal unit were checked and updated where necessary. This is supported by Ariane Powell's email to all neonatal staff. So they suggest there that at least from the nursing and management side, that there was an intention to ensure that all of the staff went through their competencies being checked. Now, we have to believe that. So that suggests to me that there was big pressure from the consultants that we don't really care about the other stuff. We've decided that the commonality is important. We've seen from very early on, even in June 2015, but certainly July in 2015, they become fixated with this notion of commonality. Now, I can see why people believe that is, I don't know, suspect or suspicious. I don't think that. I do believe, and I still believe, that it began with genuine concern about some 3 rather rapid deaths. Now, with regard to the fixation on the commonality, it would be speculative for me to say why they fixate on this so quickly. I have no idea. I don't have a good answer to that question. I know lots of people give their comments in the comment section. I've also heard many experts, both on this channel and not on this channel, give me their views. Let's be realistic here. This is a life and death situation. You don't cut corners. If there were serious intentions of looking at competency on the unit and looking at whether or not clinical practice was adequate, they would have made this happen. It's as simple as that. And then Alison Kelly states here, they should have checked that they could support supervision first before agreeing to put this supervision in place during July-August 2016. I have found no evidence to suggest that the intention on the 14th of July 2016 was not to revisit competencies and to introduce supervision for Lucy Letby, for which time she would remain on the unit. This is supported by all the witness statements and emails from Ariane Powell and Yvonne Griffiths. Ariane Powell has provided evidence that competencies have been revisited for the nursing staff working on the neonatal unit. The downgrading of the unit and the undertaking of the external review is attributed to the postponement of the clinical supervision on the unit. I mean, that's interesting. That's something new that I don't think we've seen previously. So they're claiming the unit was downgraded because we couldn't engage in clinical supervision. So therefore, we haven't been able to complete the review. So therefore, they've downgraded the unit. That doesn't seem very likely to me because it's still downgraded 10 years later. But I suppose everyone working there doesn't want to believe they've been downgraded due to incompetence. But I mean, this seems like they're completely deluding themselves, to be frank. Supervision of practice and revision of competencies for the medical staff was raised with Ian Harvey, who described that the ways in which medical competency is assessed. He stated that it was not feasible to record revision of competencies in the same way as for nursing staff, and that it was an ongoing process but was underway. So this never happened fully. Like, we know this from previous documents, so obviously they're trying to make the defence that it was not feasible or not practical in some way, but it doesn't seem like that they were particularly committed to it, certainly from my perspective. But finally we have the conclusion of Dr. Chris Green. I conclude that the proposed plan of supervision of practice and repetition of competencies has been implemented, although not in the way in which it was originally outlined to Lucy on the 14th of July 2016. Based on the evidence, I believe that this was the genuine intention of the Trust at the time, but that the planned clinical supervision has been identified as being impractical to implement and is superseded by the undertaking of the external review and deep dive forensic report. So after this external review took place, after there was a deep dive forensic report, after they involved all the staff in various things, they did all these things, and that's when Lucy's supposed to come back on the unit. But Dr. Breary and Dr. Jairam, among others, decided we're not happy with that. And basically the only thing that would have made them happy was someone going to the police. That is the point. Even though they'd done clinical supervision, all the infants had pathology reports, they'd had coronial reports, 2 further neonatologists had looked at them. The RCPCH had done a review. There'd been all these internal processes as well. But if they were going to do something further, that would have been the time for external medical reviews. And that's what should have happened. Although, to be honest, given the level of investigation into these infants already, which revealed no foul play and no reason to believe any foul play, that should have been enough. That definitely should have been enough. But if it wasn't, then there should have been a full medical review. The idea that it should go to the police, and the police are better placed to investigate this, is just absolute poppycock. I mean, I don't understand how anyone could possibly believe that. And again, it's just so strange that Breary and Jairam, particularly Breary, was so insistent that this was referred to the police. I cannot see any reasonable justification for that. And as I mentioned previously, they're taking an enormous risk by pushing for this. It could have all blown up in their face quite easily. It's one of many extraordinary things that occurred at this hospital, in the police investigation, in court, in the entire debacle of the conviction of Lucy Letby. So then the second point is the reasons for me, obviously being Lucy, being instructed not to have any contact with my neonatal unit colleagues for an extended period of time. When questioned regarding the above, Karen restated, "I think this may have been my fault. I didn't want her talking to the unit staff. Lucy Letby wasn't refused contact. That wasn't the intention anyway." So this does seem to be a genuine mix-up, because this is something that Lucy sincerely believed, and it does seem that nursing staff didn't actually want her to become as isolated as she did. Again, one wonders if this had been they seem to have some serious communication problems on this unit. But if communication had been better, then perhaps she would have been less isolated, and perhaps she wouldn't have written the notes, and perhaps they wouldn't have been used against her in court. Now, it's likely she would have been charged and prosecuted anyway, I feel. But that's a major part of the prosecution case, even though it's obviously complete crap. So this had another situation where you can see a knock-on effect of something occurring inadvertently, then you see the consequence of that, and then that ends up getting used against Lucy. Sue Hodgkinson stated that it surprised me what she thought she was allowed to do. "I found no evidence that the Trust executive team stipulated that Lucy Letby was to have no contact with the unit. The Trust disciplinary policy states the following in relation to exclusion from duty. They, the employee, should not contact any member of staff connected with the matter which led to their exclusion, nor should they approach any other staff seeking information relevant to the case. This does not mean that the employee cannot have normal social contact with other employees of the Trust outside of work. However, the employee must not discuss anything related to the situation case in question. Whilst it is clear that Lucy Letby was not excluded from duty, it is also clear that she was being redeployed away from her substantive role pending the outcome of the external review. I consider, therefore, that the same principles in relation to the above apply, and that this should therefore have been explained to Lucy Letby clearly on the 18th of July 2016. I conclude that, although the intention was not to prevent Lucy Letby from having normal social contact with colleagues from the neonatal unit, that Lucy Letby believed this was the instruction, leaving her isolated from her social and work support network." Now let me emphasise something at this point. When Nick Johnson cross-examines her in court, he accuses Lucy Letby of making this up, of fabricating the idea that she was isolated from people on the unit. Whereas, of course, this document came out after the court case, and we now know, as with so much, basically everything that Lucy Letby has said while being interviewed by the police and while being cross-examined, time after time after time, she says things, and then we find out that they're absolutely true. And it's the prosecution that had mounted a false and fallacious case. So move on to point 3. Was I being investigated on a personal level, and what is it that the external review may indicate in relation to me returning to the neonatal unit, and why the external review panel did not know about my circumstances, and why so much emphasis has been put on waiting for the review when it is not looking at anything pertinent to my situation? Now, before we go into this one, let's just contextualise this. When Lucy wrote this point down, she did not know what had been said about her. So she raised this grievance before she was actually informed what the consultants had claimed and what the consultants were apparently suspicious about. Now, of course, that should never have happened, but that is the situation. So we'll go into now what was written in relation to this point. Alison Kelly stated that she had been completely open with the review panel regarding Lucy Letby's perceived commonality with the deaths on the unit. Alison Kelly further stated that the executive team wished to give Lucy Letby the benefit of meeting with the review panel. Alison Kelly further advised that although the terms of reference for the review did not identify that they would look at the specifics of Lucy Letby's situation, that if the panel felt there was a necessity to call the police or that the unit was unsafe, that the trust would have been made aware of this verbally and immediately. So Chris Green concludes that the overarching purpose of the external review and the additional commissioned deep dive forensics review is to explore circumstances and detail around patient safety on the neonatal unit. With respect to the commonality identified between Lucy Letby being on duty and the collapses/deaths of the babies on the neonatal unit, I conclude that the executive team feel that the review will provide confirmation and reassurance that there is no direct link between the two. This would provide support for Lucy Letby in relation to assuring both herself and the trust of her clinical competence, and it is anticipated assuage the concerns raised by the consultants to the executive team. So we know for a fact that there'll be no direct link found between the two because, as we mentioned at the start of this video, this case was referred to the police with no evidence. So if there was a direct link, of course there would be evidence. So Chris Green is absolutely correct in what was a prediction at this point. Now you would hope, as he states here, that this would assuage the concerns raised by the consultants, but it seems nothing would do that. And I do think at some point you have to question whether they had a vested interest about being able to review their own practice, being able to review the competence of clinical care on the unit. Now, they claim that they did this. They claim that they did review their own practice. And it may be that they attempted to do this, but just don't have the competence to actually review their own practice satisfactorily. I mean, if you are poor at your job or if you're incompetent, then how can you assess your own competence? It's a kind of catch-22 situation or an anachronism, essentially. It's just not possible. So the next point is I would like the trust to outline to me how its values, such as being open and honest and we respect each other, have been adhered to in my situation. So, as I mentioned earlier, there is no prospect the trust can defend itself on this point. Completely pointless even attempting to do so. So, Sue Hodkinson stated that in hindsight, did we do the right thing? At the time we thought so. And I entirely agree with that. I think it's a very fair comment. I'm sure they did this for the right reasons, but the question isn't whether or not they did it for the right reasons. The question is, should they have done it? I mentioned this quote, I think, in a previous video from Jurassic Park, where they're sitting around the table, and it's quite a memorable scene where Jeff Goldblum says, "You're so preoccupied by whether or not you could do something, you didn't ask whether you should do it." And that's really what they failed to do. In these circumstances, Lucy clearly had a right to know, and that had to override everything else, obviously. So Sean Williams states, I used the phrasing that I was asked to use by Alison Kelly and Sue Hodkinson, and that informing Lucy Letby this decision was the hardest thing she'd ever done. And of course it is difficult, and it must be awful. But if someone is accusing you of something like that, and you've been taken off the unit for that reason, and all of these reviews are taking place, and all the processes that are being discussed in this document, obviously you have to be told of that. Clearly. Karen Rees stated it could have been handled better, and I think Alison Kelly and Sean Williams acknowledge that now. Undeniably true. Ian Harvey stated, to protect Lucy Letby from these allegations, we felt this redeployment was the best course of action, and I'm sure that is the truth. I'm sure it's the truth, but it just should... Whether the redeployment should have happened or not, I don't know, but she has to be told why she's being redeployed. Absolutely. It's a very delicate situation because, for example, what you would typically do in an ideal world is suspend someone on full pay. That would have been the best thing to do, but that would have only catalysed and amplified any kind of gossiping on the unit or any problems that Lucy may have encountered, the way people may have felt about her, and so on and so forth. But I mean, if you have serious allegations of a criminal nature that are related to an employee, you can't really just. I don't think they should ever have happened. That they're just stuck in another department and administrative. Imagine she was actually guilty. What could she be doing in the administrative department that you don't know about? And is someone watching over it? Obviously not, because that would make it really clear that there's something very, very wrong. So this was just so misguided on so many levels. It was a terrible mistake. Even though I do believe it comes from a good place, but you had to just front up to her and tell her the truth. It's as simple as that. The Trust Guidelines for the Conduct of Formal Investigation states, if necessary, the investigation will be carried out under the terms of strict confidentiality, i.e. by not informing the subject of the disclosure until or if it becomes appropriate to do so. This may be appropriate in cases of suspected fraud or when there could be the possibility of irreparable damage to the working relationship of the people concerned. So obviously there was the possibility of irreparable damage to the working relationship here. Not telling someone that, oh, by the way, someone on the unit's accused you of killing babies, basically. I mean, obviously, we won't tell you because it might hurt your feelings. So, you might find out at some point, but we'll try to knit things together. I accept it's a difficult situation. I fully accept it's a difficult situation, but obviously you've got to tell her. Obviously. Whilst it is acknowledged that Lucy Letby was not under any formal investigation, the principles of this have been applied to Lucy Letby's case in respect of both the potential damage that knowledge of the consultant's alleged informal allegations may have had on Lucy Letby's working relationships and on her health and well-being in general. In all the interviews involving managers and executives, there has been a general acknowledgement that Lucy Letby was not provided with the information relating to the consultant's informal allegations regarding her. There is also a consensus with these individuals that if we did the wrong thing, it was for the right reasons. Whilst I recognise that the board found themselves in a difficult position, I can conclude that the Trust have not been open and honest with Lucy in relation to the circumstances surrounding her redeployment and have not demonstrated the trust value we respect each other. And my opinion would be almost identical to Dr. Chris Green. I think what he's saying is, impossible to challenge and impossible to disagree with. I also wish to be informed of any evidence the Trust may have and the process which they have followed. Good luck, Lucy, because there's not a whole lot of evidence knocking around. During the course of this investigation, I have not been made aware, nor has there been any allusion to, any evidence relating to any alleged wrongdoing by Lucy Letby. Of course, we know the reasons why. There has been repeated reference to a commonality between the dates and times that Lucy Letby was on duty and the collapses, deaths of a significant number of the babies, but there is nothing to support. There is additional information or data beyond this that has not been shared with Lucy Letby. It's incredible when you think about it that this notion is passed from the hospital, basically from the consultant's brain, to the hospital, to the grievance procedure, to the executive committee, to the police, to Dr. Evans, to the prosecution team, to the court case, and Lucy Letby's in prison because of that. So I'll go through this point finally, and then I'll summarise this video, because there's still a lot of information to go through, and it'll probably become an extremely long video. So I will go through the remainder of this document in part 2 that will come up in the next few days. I would appreciate assurances from the executive team that this has been dealt with appropriately and that my confidentiality is being maintained. Lucy Letby alleged that colleagues had been questioned regarding whether there was or had ever been a personal relationship between herself and Stephen Breary. So this is obviously very significant. The Trust Guidelines for the Conduct of Formal Investigation suggest establishing if the complainant has a grudge against the person whom the allegations are against. Sue Hodkinson stated that an informal discussion was had involving herself, Alison Kelly and Karen Rees, during which this was discussed but that it didn't leave the room. Karen Rees stated that nobody asked me, people look for a reason. Sue Hodkinson further stated in response to this concern, we can categorically state that nothing has been commissioned by the executive team in relation to the concerns that you have raised. So before we go any further, let's just reflect on why this point has been raised. So Lucy's asking about murmurings about a relationship between herself and Breary. Obviously, she believes this to be unfounded, I think quite reasonably we can assume it is unfounded. So it seems to me that this is something that's been raised and now it's circling around in the manner of Chinese whispers among people that work on the unit. And Lucy must be very annoyed about this, and understandably so. So that's why she's asking the question, where the hell has this come from? What the hell is going on, basically? Sue Hodkinson stated that Lucy Letby had been advised by the external review draft report. I'd been advised that the external review draft report had been received by the Trust before either Sue Hodkinson or Ian Harvey were aware of this, and has no knowledge of how this occurred. Karen Rees, Sean Williams, Ariane Powell, Yvonne Griffiths all confirmed they had heard rumours of highly inappropriate and insensitive comments being made on the unit, but these did not name Lucy Letby. I mean, they might as well have done. Who do they think it was about? I mean, it would be very, very clear who it was about, considering all the context that is occurring around Lucy Letby. Ian Harvey stated that he had spoken to one of the consultants regarding comments heard on the unit, so this could be McCormack. We don't know. Ariane Powell sent an email to all neonatal unit staff regarding Lucy Letby's redeployment, which appears to have been accepted by the unit. Yvonne Griffiths stated that a member of staff had bumped into Lucy Letby and asked when she was coming back, which implies this individual at least considered the redeployment to be temporary. And that they would have no reason to think otherwise. Of course, Lucy believed her redeployment to be temporary. So then Chris Green concludes, I have not found any evidence that Lucy Letby's confidentiality with regard to the circumstances surrounding a redeployment has not been upheld. However, there are obvious concerns regarding the alleged comments made on the unit. Ian Harvey stated this had been addressed, and there is no suggestion of any similar remarks being made following this. Critically, these did not name Lucy Letby, were not directly heard by any of the individuals interviewed as part of this process. I conclude that the Trust has not failed to protect Lucy Letby's confidentiality with regard to the circumstances regarding her redeployment. So I think that's a fair conclusion, but it's also obvious from the specific comments that are made that Lucy's been put into an increasingly difficult position, that there are rumours flying around, that people will know that this is in relation to Lucy, that I'm pretty doubtful that her name wasn't mentioned. It's stated here that her name wasn't mentioned, but it easily could have been, for all we know. I mean, Chris Green and those that comment here as Karen Rees, Sean Williams, Ariane Powell and Yvonne Griffiths, they may not be privy to private comments that are made between nurses. So I think it's likely that she was named, but that they just don't know about it. So I kind of disagree with what is stated here, but I do think efforts were made to ensure that Lucy's confidentiality was protected. I should say in conclusion, finally, that apart from this, very important to consider this aspect of Stephen Breary, but overall this is kind of the least important point, because they can't really protect her confidentiality in any meaningful way, because she's taken off the unit and she's banged in an administrative role. So whether or not they protected the confidentiality is essentially meaningless, because she's never going to be confidential anyway. So this is by far the least important point of the whole grievance. So let's summarise what we know at this point. At the time that the grievance began, we know that the consultants most associated with concerns about Lucy Letby had not produced any concrete evidence of wrongdoing. This is reflected throughout the grievance procedure. It is therefore important to emphasise that suggestions made which imply or explicitly state that there should have been an investigation into wrongdoing at the Council Chester, as opposed to a grievance procedure focusing on Lucy's removal from the unit, are utterly senseless. This would be impossible, as there would be nothing on which to base such an investigation. The grievance centred on Letby's removal from the neonatal unit, and her wish to understand what she had allegedly done, what evidence existed, and whether the Trust had acted openly and fairly. Lucy wanted to return to the neonatal unit, receive an apology and get a full explanation of the events. It seems that this was driven by her desire to resurrect and re-establish her reputation as a highly regarded neonatal nurse. The grievance was formally investigated by Dr. Christopher Green, with external reviewer Annette Weatherly and HR support from Lucy Samenta. A long list of hospital executive managers and nurses were interviewed, including Alison Kelly, Sue Hodkinson, Sean Williams, Karen Rees, Ariane Powell, Yvonne Griffiths, Ravi Jairam and Stephen Breary. The initial plan was for all neonatal staff to undergo competency review and supervision, but Lucy Letby became the sole focus. Although it is accepted that this was not the initial intention, it seems clear that it was always the intention of the consultants who had instigated her removal. Lucy was moved from night shifts to day shifts, then later redeployed away from the neonatal unit to PALS risk and patient safety while reviews were underway. This redeployment was humiliating for Lucy, and she clearly understood it as a judgment on her competence. Lucy was not properly told the real reason for her removal at first, and that the Trust only later made clear that the consultants had raised concerns. I believe that the Trust tried to protect Lucy by limiting what staff were told and also by providing a false explanation for her redeployment, but this left her isolated, confused and misinformed. There is no possible way that this information should have been kept from her, no matter how delicate the situation was at the time. The grievance process itself acknowledged that the Trust had not been fully open and honest with Lucy, especially about the allegations and the way the process was handled. There was no evidence beyond coincidence and commonality at the time, during the grievance, after the grievance, or even when the case was passed to the police. The Trust believed it was acting for the right reasons, but the way it handled supervision, redeployment and communication was still deeply flawed. We learned that there were rumours circulating regarding Dr. Stephen Breary and Lucy having some form of relationship beyond a professional one. It is suggested that Lucy's name was not mentioned explicitly with regard to various allegations at the time, and this was accepted by Dr. Chris Green. It is very hard to imagine that this is true. If the Trust had done what they told Lucy they had intended to do, assess all staff competencies and perform a punctual unit review, she may have been able to return to the unit, and none of the preceding events may have occurred. One can perhaps now understand the situation Lucy was in. The following has occurred to her. She has been removed from her job, which was clearly her passion. Her competence has been called into question. This is fundamental to her identity. There are rumours related to Lucy flying around the unit. Some truly horrible allegations have been made. She has been isolated from friends and colleagues. She has been lied to regarding several issues. There has been no transparency regarding what has occurred and why. She was told that all staff would be treated the same, which was untrue. She was promised a return that dragged on and never materialised. All of the above occurred on the basis of no evidence. It's perhaps therefore understandable that when she wrote this green note, this infamous post-it note, that she perhaps wasn't in the best frame of mind. Finally, I just want to show people this document. This is a police interview of Dr. Chris Green. So many have wondered what extent the police looked into the grievance procedure at the hospital. So we will firstly note, with regard to this document, that it's dated the 2nd of October 2019. So Lucy has already been arrested twice before they even bother to interview Chris Green and even get round to speaking with him. Please note as well, we're only going to see pages 11 and pages 33 of this document, which I think goes on for 68 pages. So you can see how important the police consider the rest of the document to be. So the first page of this is just the police talking about bags with Chris Green and some incident area on Powell. It's essentially completely irrelevant. That's page 11. So we don't get to see anything else until page 33. And then here, there's some... Chris Green recounts the fact that he asked himself a few times, am I helping out somebody here who's done something horrific? But it wasn't my job to decide whether she had or hadn't done anything. My job was to do the investigation of the grievance. And that was it. I wasn't there to draw any sort of conclusions about what had gone on the unit itself. So this could be a false recollection. That's not really particularly important. But the police going, difficult for you. Yeah. And across this table, looking at her thinking, well, that won't show up on the tape, will it? But thinking, Are you a monster or are you the fall guy in this? Yeah. And I didn't know the answer to that. Just going on an interview with Lucy, was anything ever discussed in relation to the neonatal unit babies or anything like that? Or was it just focused on the grievance procedure? Was anything ever said to you by her that you think is relevant for me now? So basically, they're just revealing here, they couldn't make it any clearer, that they don't think the grievance procedure is relevant to them. And as they never bothered to call Chris Green in before this, that means they never considered the grievance procedure to be of any relevance. And we know that now. That's crystal clear. So I just picked up on this the other day. So another thing that we learn here, and it's just in this final little passage, is that Dr. Chris Green mentions Tony Malaya, the union representative of Lucy, who launches her grievance procedure by advising Lucy that she'd have a claim for constructive dismissal, and writes a letter that it's on the 2nd of September 2016, shortly before the grievance procedure begins. I've shown this letter in previous videos. What do they say? Okay, I've not heard that name before. Of course they've not heard that name before, because they never made any effort to look at the grievance. This is just another indication of the competence or lack thereof of Operation Hummingbird.